So here we are. We're about to start this discussion of, well, what would have been the birth order sequence and its significance. So, Jason, my suggestion is that we start this process in a way that students who are learning about this can see why it's useful and filled with opportunities to learn such a underlying system. Because, we're talking about 6 boys, 6 girls in this model of the birth order system. There's a lot of complexities about how that works and what happens when we have what we'll call later the genetic number versus the gender number or the social number, how to see all the variations, its effect on personality, its effect on development or growth or how it works. But it's really not so much about the actual children involved, but why would anyone spend their time to examine this? And for me, the reason is this applies to everyone all the time, meaning that the experience of these categories called birth order patterns actually breaks down to glands, organs, and body systems on the physical level. It corresponds to elements of the mind and personality, and the correspondence to analysis or awareness, or it corresponds to all of the attributes of discovery.
And the cycles and
so
seasons.
There's more to it.
Times of the day. So we all cycle through these.
Yeah, so all of the cycles of the times of the day, phases of the moon, all of the meridians, seasons of the year, each stage of life. So it literally corresponds to all of the nutritional functions of the body, all the glandular and physical body systems, all the meridian and subtle body forces, all of the vibrational medicines, and it has a correspondence to the development of who we are, not only in the nature of our personality or our health, but in the correspondence to our own soul's development. So who are we? What are we?
Where are we going?
How do we function? Where are we going? So this is about the gradual awareness and sensitivity to these individual attributes that we hold universally and how they may be developed through our individuality and our own desires. So how we develop these attributes. And the truth is, I'm actually just learning this, and I've been studying this process for 40 years, and I realize that this is not 40 years, this is a lifetime, and the use and the study of these attributes or functions, there's something that we take with us into the spirit world as we develop. So some of these are naturally innate, but they're all expandable. Some of them are very unique to the birth position that I occupy, but they too are expandable. So what can I do to identify these qualities or attributes that I will be using now for the rest of my life? I'm just beginning because I will be using them forever in the spirit world. And the interesting thing about it is that their development is completely dependent on me. Yes, I can be aided by certain people to be inspired or to be motivated. I can learn from people by example, but the actual experience of them is completely dependent on me. And my desire to develop certain attributes using these skills is completely up to me. So I'm personally responsible for developing my awareness of and my sensitivity to each one of these qualities. And it really depends on me to always keep coming back to them because my comprehension and sensitivity and growth will depend on everything I've done.
There's probably also an evolution of consciousness that they're evolving anyway, whether people have heard of them or not. Hopefully over a lifetime there might be things like disease and suffering that teaches us something if we're there to learn, if we're open to learning, even without knowing the system. We grow and we get better at
physical and emotional symptoms. They are very much reflected into our physical bodies or emotional body, how we correspond to that kind of relationship attractions we have, our degree of emotional or physical success in the world. So it's how to be able to recognize this. Now, within all of this is the primary solution through the understanding of the truth about how this works, about how we actually begin to become responsible for our own condition. So how do we progress? How do we progress now beyond the common experience of illusions of things that don't work? How do we do this and reach a higher degree of success? And by that, I would mean a change in who we are that's based on the principles of the design of truth, so that we can use this to continue to progress no matter where we are, whether we're in this world or the next. That's why it's so interesting, eternal, beautiful, saturated with beauty. I like to think of it as such an amazing thing. We can talk about the elements of one boy and one girl, and then two boy and two girl, and three and three, and four and four, and five and six and six. We're talking about the progression of the sequence of the flow of life force in the body and the animation of the physical body biochemically through the hormones and glands, and then stimulated into the organs and body systems.
Those that know the chakra system, it's almost like a yin and yang.
All of these sequences that relate to the body, and yes, including the chakra systems and beyond. So wow, it's like, how do we even begin to develop a greater appreciation for who we are? And how do we actually function? What are the universal laws that are truly affecting us? And then how can we naturally desire to bring ourselves in harmony with this sequence of laws, so that we cannot be limited by the laws, but we can utilize them to continue to seek a liberation of who we are? So when we're in conflict with laws that we don't understand, or that we ignorantly violate without knowing it, we'll produce emotional and physical symptoms to show us that we're out of harmony with these laws. So if we understand how these laws work, we have a greater opportunity to be in harmony.
So the laws would be guiding us to be more loving and truthful.
Yes, so these laws are guiding us to become responsible for our own individuality, responsible for the things that we have inside of us, and responsible to recognize that oftentimes our behavior is predicated on the damage we've received genetically and the damage that we've created by our choices, and we're influenced by the relationship of our mother and our father and the other responsible caregivers and siblings around us. All of these are part of a progression. So the study of this is actually an awakening of how we function. And I'll be honest with you, I feel like I'm a kindergartner, just a preschooler trying to study a university, because the magnitude of what's really available far exceeds my current comprehension or understanding.
Yeah, so
but by talking to you, I'm desiring to grow my feeling and my comprehension.
yeah, so
My way of learning.
our understanding of what they are now is yet but the tiniest glimpse of what's really there.
Yes, and so important. And then we'll learn interesting things. We'll learn, for example, that the personality and attributes of a typical number one son actually shows us the qualities and attributes inside of us that we can choose to become responsible for and voluntarily expand. So by looking at a childlike personality of a number one son and watching all of his stages of maturity, we recognize that there are qualities in the number one son that are inside me. And those same qualities and attributes, they slip into systems like the times of the day, and the first one being from 12 midnight to 2 a.m. There's a cyclic flow of qualities, and this cyclic flow of qualities that match the 24 hours also matches the sequence of the birth order steps. So by studying that, I began to learn about how do I fit in the world, but I also learned, well, I would even call it the first step. So if I were to rename the name birth order sequences, it would be first step, second step, the steps of life, the steps of eternity, stairway to heaven. What are the first things I need to do?
So down there, there's responsibility and humility. Would be
So if we take the qualities of a number one girl, we call it responsibility. There's lots of definitions about how that functions. If we take the quality of a number one boy, we call it humility, and we have one boy and one girl, and we examine what they really mean, we're actually examining the very first step of how I need to gather those instruments within myself and apply them to every other step. So I can take the qualities of number one and number one, both of those, and even expand that into the rings of the iris. The ring closest to the pupil being number one, the ring in the middle being 3 and 4, and the rings on the outside being 5 and 6. So I can use the iris, I can use the times of the day, phases of the moon, seasons of the year, and study the qualities in that season, and it corresponds to something inside me. So the use of these is the study of these that I used to call the birth order. They're actually sequential steps to everything. How do I use these? So one of the ways is to begin to develop the desire to feel them, understand them, learn the truth about them, explore them, experiment with it, see it faced in people, examine it in nature, see how it corresponds to organs and glands and body systems, and just develop a stronger desire to know the truth about it. Step number 1, we just described the very first step. Responsibility. Boy, we could talk about a long time. What does this responsibility relate to? Well, it corresponds to the innate existence of one's will. We can call that free will if you want, but it is the existence of the will. And there's many things about the will which corresponds to individuality and individualization, and how the use of that will is actually the instrument by which we can make choices.
It's like an I
but
amness.
That's also like the mineral kingdom. You had a question, Jason?
Yeah, it's like that I am. It's that sort of iron will, that sort of strength and rock mineral kingdom that's at the one girl level.
Yes, it's at the one girl level is the mineral kingdom. Well, the challenge is that one girl level is also where all of the unresolved genetic conditions are essentially held. So we were given a huge amount of genetic conditions, most of which we don't even utilize or open. We often just transfer them to another generation to open. So the attributes of our genetic code and our family tree, the epigenetic influences of everybody in the family tree is in many ways locked into this mineral-like vault of the number one girl's grounded control of and held very tightly. The will to survive, which is the same will which seeks to avoid or respond aggressively to fear. So that we can describe this, and we will. We'll come back and describe this whole will element of the individuality and why it's so important, because it has this self-preserving quality.
And then if we look at the polar opposite of that at one boy, we've got this expansiveness of imagination and dreaming and softness and humility and openness.
It's literally how to dissolve this, how to take this composite granite mountain of unresolved feelings and unresolved illusory belief systems held within us, and use the dilating qualities of the number one boy to come into this and wash this graveled mountain with the movement and fluidity of an open mind, an open feeling, and the desire to progress. And the softness of one boy, it is part of the instrument that keeps this fluid enough to change. That's why this part of one-on-one is so important, is because eventually I'm going to take, number one, responsibility, attitude, belief system, memory, whatever you want to call it, and my willingness to grow and change, and I'm going to apply that to number two and number three and number four and number five, number 6, 7, and 8. I'm going to apply my will and my humility now and forever. So if we take them apart, we could spend, and I have done my best and still doing it, we can spend years examining the significance of what do we really mean by humility? What does that feel like, act like? What does that look like in nature? What does it feel like in relationships? How does that relate to my breathing? How does that relate to my metabolism? How does that relate to truth? How does that relate to love? How does that relate to growing? How does that relate to my involvement in nature? How does humility relate to my progression into the spirit world? Why is humility first in the 24-hour sequence of the timeline? Why is humility first? Why does the lung meridian come first? Why is it so important that we learn how to dilate the granite mountain? That's one-on-one, right? Then how do we apply that to the next level, which has to do primarily with the experiences to increase our capacity to feel? On one side, the two boy is the feeling experienced through choice and action. Mobility set in movement, passion, purpose, courage. It has all kinds of different attributes that relate to it. Then we have on the opposite side of that, called the feeling instruments of the two girl, which for me right now, and it's quite personal, I'm seeing that as empathy. How is empathy, the two girl, connected to humility, the one boy. So how does humility affect courage and passion? How does humility affect my ability to have empathy and the ability to be able to feel? Empathy, to me, is the chosen opportunity to experience a feeling that is defined as the ability to feel the feelings of someone else. But I'm saying empathy can be used through the experience of my feelings toward nature or water or earth, flowers. I can feel empathy with the moon in a way. So I can choose to take my feeling mechanism and feel something. That's two-girl. So on the two-girl side, empathy. The two-boy side, action, fire, purpose, a dynamic creativity in motion.
To get a good fire going, you need air, which air is the one boy element.
Yeah, so that's the one boy element of the lung thing that adds to the fire. That's why the
oxygen in the blood.
Inspiration, right? The feeling of the inspiration is like that. So how does that relate to will? How does the rock or the earth relate to the fire or the water? So how does that all work together? How does my rock maintain my stability, and yet I need to change the hardness of my belief systems by having the humility and the open-mindedness to examine what's helpful, what's true, and what's loving or not. So this is why we're describing this map. How does all of that relate to each step of the way? So we just went through 4 of them. Humility, one boy. Responsibility, one girl. Empathy, a feeling experience of the two-girl. And then courage or fire, the feeling experience of the two-boy. Now we're describing energy at the bottom of my spine, number 1, into my belly, number 2. Then we're going to go up into 3, 4, 5 in the throat, 6 in the head. We follow that sequence. I know it sounds a lot like chakras, and it is, and it isn't, because it's more than that. I would like to more consider it. What are the innate and dynamic attributes of my own soul that I can choose to identify and choose to have the desire to increase?
So these 12 also relate to our grandparents and great-grandparents and unresolved feelings in the family tree.
One of my personal favorite topics that I sometimes like to do even when I'm alone is I like to go into the timeline or the line of everything and how the cycles and seasons of the day and the month and the year and the life also correspond to where we receive and hide feelings, including where do we put the feelings that my great-grandmother from my mother's side gave me? How does that correspond to the iris? How does that correspond to my ability to sleep or to breathe or to eat? How does it affect my skin? And so on and so on. The topics are so vast, as there's so many and so many different versions of the way to see it and feel it that we will be eternally expanding this map. The map may also be a soul-based emotional experience of what you might be able to call the glands and organs of the soul. And ultimately, there is something like the love of truth that can be a gland or organ. Wisdom is a gland or organ. And we can see the desire to give and receive love as a gland or organ. We can see individuality. We can see compassion. We can see the love of the spirit world, or even the love of nature or mystery. We can see all of these as glands or organs, including humility is an eternally expanding attribute. I mean, you might in some ways look at the relationship between the skin, which is oftentimes in this model, the pineal and sixth girl, and her son is number one son in the model when you learn it, and how number one son is the breath, and what is the relationship between the lungs and skin, and how does breathing in the lungs affect breathing in the skin, and how does the attribute of humility affect our skin, and how does the attribute of humility and breath in the lungs affect our metabolism and the ability to be able to interface that through the rest of the body. So if you might define the humility as a sincere desire to want to feel, or a sincere desire to want to feel all of the feelings inside me, no matter what they are. So if I were to say, hey, let's go on a journey, but we forget that we have the garage door down, it causes a mess. Or if we forget that there are ropes and chains and barriers at the gate, so we're going to go on a journey. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to discover all of the unresolved suffering and pain that my entire family tree gave me? Why would you want to discover all of the fear, all of the anguish, all of the depression, all the rage, all the hatred, all the terror that all of my ancestry gave me genetically and put inside my rocks? So inside my one girl is all of the stuff of painful, unresolved everything, and it's inside me. So before I go on a journey, I have to be willing to want to feel it.
And there would also be the attainment of those higher qualities passed down genetically.
But oftentimes, in order to experience the higher qualities, we have to acknowledge that the misuse of those higher qualities has been stored inside of us and inhibits our ability to use the higher ones until we experience and release the lower ones. So, for example, my great-grandfather might have given me the experience of rage and hatred that comes down through my family tree. But in order for me to be able to experience the positive attributes of rage, if you want to take a flip side to it, what does the rage really hide? What does it deny? I can't go into the higher levels of enthusiasm or courage or purpose or joy or mobility. I can't use that conduit of extreme levels of feelings without being willing to feel and remove the unresolved rage and hatred from my grandfather. So if I'm going to be genuinely humble, I have to be sincerely willing to accept the responsibility that I have been filled up with hundreds, perhaps thousands of unresolved feelings and memories given to me genetically and infused in my mother and father's relationship in utero and imprinted in me under the age of 2, but particularly even under the age of 7. I'm filled with this, and no matter what it is, I am the only one that is capable of being able to remove it.
So for practitioners working with people, there's a map where they're helping their clients to see how these unresolved feelings can affect different glands and organs and health conditions, and how certain conditions might pull from the father's side of the family and other conditions from the mother's side. And there's a map that can sort of build rapport in consultation, because I think it's quite a powerful thing. And just useful for highlighting what the unresolved feelings are more likely to be.
There are many ways of being able to use this. If the desire is to use it for personal assessment or diagnostic principles, to use that in some way, or to use it in a different way, it can be used that way because there are no limits to it. But yes, can you look at a body type? Can you look at the symptoms and the behavior and the personality? Can you look at the history in the family tree and to begin to identify what the probable unresolved feelings are that a person needs to accept the responsibility, one, to remove or change, and have the open-mindedness or the possibility or the feeling of humility to be able to remove them. So that one-on-one is very important no matter what it is. But am I completely willing to accept the responsibility to increase my own progression by being willing to do that work myself? Now, the problem is, sometimes in the allopathic world, the effort to try and help somebody is to give them a biochemical intervention to change the symptoms of a particular gland or organ without actually guiding them to accept the responsibility with the humility to be able to remove the reason why that gland or organ is out of balance. So sometimes the study of the sequence 1 through 6, it can give you clues about the body systems and the whole genetic code that we're dealing with, but I must be the one to be responsible enough to remove it. And this is the very thing I'm attempting to learn and practice on myself on a daily basis. So that's where it works when it comes to how to do this. But this is why I like the birth order sequence or the steps. The steps. It's the steps on a ladder or the steps on a path. This is a path that we'll be taking for a very, very long time. So these steps, whether they're 1 and 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 3, 4 and 4, 5 and 5 and 6 and 6, those are the things that we're going to be doing all day long, every day, whether we know it or not. But in the spirit world, we'll primarily be working on a single point of the ladder until we actually experience, feel, and resolve on a preliminary level that step. And we can't go to the next step until we've resolved enough of the first step. So learning the first step is very important. That first step, by the way, is a doozy. I'm still recognizing the magnitude of how our collective and individual denial of the suffering, pain, and fear, terror inside of us is the primary thing that we have to do first. And it's not popular.
Yeah.
So what most people do when they have terror, pain, or suffering is they find some way to desperately avoid it.
Yeah, so if there was the fear of poverty, for example, you just think about how much activity that drives in the world and how much denial and running away and escape from that there is.
Sure.
And
every issue, no matter what it is, we find some way to actively or deal with it or not deal with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm, like, boy. So I'm trying to suggest that if someone wants to begin, the first place to begin is the first step. And part of that is simply the acknowledgement of the responsibility of one person to accept that opportunity to use the innate function called free will to make a choice to progress. And we could describe the difference between the use of free will to progress in the degree of love or the use of free will to avoid that progression. Because 99.9% of the people I meet are using their free will to avoid the responsibility to progress. Even when they believe they're actually utilizing their free will to progress, they're actually being motivated by the will of fear. So they're doing all kinds of activities that they would say, this is a good thing to be doing, but in reality it is an indication of which one of the fears they're attempting to resolve through that activity. But the problem is they never resolve it, they just cycle through it. I've done it many times myself, and I'm doing my best not to do it as often. But most people are driven by the experience of fear. And that fear is so systemic and so deep. It's a fear that involves myself and others and the entire collective of the world. And that's very much the first step that has to be done on the very first rung of the ladder through the eternal chain, is how to accept the responsibility to progress. First step, to look at and examine what I'm afraid of, and to look at what's not true, look at what's loving, what's not loving, and have a sincere desire and a softness of heart and mind that now describes the fundamental benefits of humility. So that's part of why I like the overview of the birth order, is because I apply it to everything. And I would say to anyone else, are you willing to accept the responsibility to progress in love? And most people go, oh yes, of course. Then that means you have to examine virtually everything within yourself that's not loving. And when you start to do that, you start to realize that we've been saturated with unloving impulses since the very day we were conceived. And we've used that saturation of unloving impulses throughout our childhood, and then we were infused with more, and we've transmitted unloving impulses every day of our life without even knowing it. Nearly all of them founded on fear. So I'm examining that part. How does that relate to number 1 and number 1? How does that relate to number 2 and 2 and 3 and 3? That sounds like a lot to do, isn't it?
Some serious homework.
Some serious homework. And, at another time, I would really like to subdivide the whole topic of responsibility into the will to survive, which is a will based on fear, versus a will to thrive. And there's a difference, because a lot of people believe that they're engaged in the will to thrive when it's actually, whipping the horse of fear to move faster, provide more, do more, respond more, please more, pander more, anger more. You start to realize, wait wait, no, I think I'm being motivated more by actually fear than I am being motivated by love. Did we get through anything about the birth order in this process?
A little snippet of an overview. So we will go on to record each individual one. So a whole recording of one girl, a whole recording at 3 girl, 5 girl, of 1 boy, 3 boy, 5 boy.
I would certainly recommend it because it's a book I thought about writing, but I'm not competent enough yet to outline that book. And so for me, this process has more to do with me developing a desire to grow in it by even bringing the topic up and discussing it with you. So if I'm saying, I want to learn more about will and humility, then I'm experimenting with dialoguing it with you, and I'm still learning how to be able to progress using it. Because I'm going to use free will and the desire to change and feel on all the other levels. So without really comprehending one and one, I can't really do 2 or 3. For example, 3 boy has a lot to do with truth. Truth is probably the universal can opener. I mean, it opens or solves or dissects or liberates darkness, confusion, despair. So they say the truth is what sets you free. The truth element of number 3 is empowered by the humility of number 1 and the empathy of number 2, girl. It is founded in strength by the integrity and the responsibility of 1 girl. It's compelled and moved by the desires and the passions of 2 boy. So all of the elements of the truth come from 1 and 1 and 2 and 2, but all of the experiences of the desire to know the truth at 3 boy are met by the soul-based emotional experience of 3 girl. So I can have all the desire to know the truth that's fed by all of the other 4, but 3 girl is the soul-based experience of the thing I desire to have the truth about. And that's really those 6 are the first half, or the foundational principles. So do I want to have a soul-based experience of 4, which is giving and receiving of love? Do I want to have a soul-based experience of 5 and 6? Do I want to have a soul-based understanding of 7 and 8? Do I want to know the truth about 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8? In order to do that, I have to have the desire and the will and the humility to go one by one and discover and realize why they are so important. And as I go through the sequences, I've noticed that what starts out at 1 boy goes out horizontally a number of cycles until the study of 1 boy also includes the experience of feeling through faith. So there's an innocence, or there's a childlike quality. So there is a innate opportunity in my humility to start to feel something. And then in the feeling of something as I go up, I look at the mysteries of the universe and of nature and how everything is put together so beautifully and scientifically and logically, and how the colors of the rainbow are sequenced in such a pretty way that there may in reality be some creator I am created by, and now the humility becomes a different kind of humility. It's a humility not just to feel, but to feel all the levels of that. Now, if you can do the same thing on the side of the will, that's why I'm saying the first will is a will to survive, right? Which very much affects the hips and the number one, the whole pelvic cavity and the experience of what that feels like. But by the time you take that will out many cycles, it becomes a completely different experience. What does it feel like to be an enlivened will to progress, an enlivened experience to flourish, an enlivened acceptance of one's responsibility, that the degree of love inside me is completely dependent on me. The will to survive doesn't have much love in it at all. But gradually, as you go through the change and recognition of the truth about the will, and you have a soul-based experience in each category, you come back to it, it changes the whole comprehension and perception and the feeling at number one. Now, that was a lot to get, wasn't it?
Yeah. And as that goes out as you take that out to 3, it's that whole communal, social, connecting with others sense of belonging that.
Sure. Because 1 and 2 is primarily about self, whereas 3 goes into self in relationship to others, which is a tricky category, because then we have to learn to share our toys and the sandbox without throwing sand or stealing toys or bonking somebody over the head. So that whole 3 category, which obviously corresponds to liver and gallbladder and pancreas and all the elements of the things around 3, we could go on describing what that really means. Ring number 1, first octave, 1 and 2, self. Ring number 2, 3 and 4, others. Ring number 3, 5 and 6, my relationship to the collective. Very different than 3 and 4, very different than 1 and 2, but they have diameters of inclusiveness. So the diameter of myself in relationship to others, in relationship to the collective. And that collective turns out to be the collective of everything I can, barely even comprehend in ecology, which we don't really understand how the whole ecology works together. But that's only in the tactile, visible world. Then there is the ecology of the spirit world. Whoa. How do I actually feel about the presence of spirits in the room standing around me? Now I have to cycle through, with some degree of humility and responsibility, all my feelings on all these other levels. Geez, if there are actually spirits in the world, are there nasty ones? Are there nice ones? Is it Casper the ghost, or is it an angel? So these individual responsibilities, social responsibilities, collective responsibilities, I have to be the one to have the desire to go there. Do you want to know the truth about number 5? I certainly do. So you can say, do I want to know the truth about number 2? Some of the disappointing news is dealing with number 1 may be the hardest thing we ever do. And by the way, number 1 is here. The place we're in is, number 1, right? And even when we die, which we don't die, we pass into the spirit world, we're still in number 1. And what's the lesson that we're primarily dealing with in number 1? Self. And yet we can't really become the self at number 1 until we accept the responsibility to feel 1 and 1. We can't really become who we are at number 2 to feel my own empathy and my own courage and passions until we deal with the most important thing that we have to deal with in the world at number 1, which is, heaven help us, family. Well, Jason, I'm not sure what kind of an introduction this is, but I'm having fun just doing it.
Yeah, really, when you think about family and you think about what's unresolved in the family tree that you've acquired, well, you're going to pass that down as well. So, that increases the responsibility.
Sure it does, but you're already jumping ahead to not damaging your children and grandchildren, which is a nice motivation maybe, but dealing with the actual experience of, pardon me, what did the bastards give you? I mean, how much pain and suffering, without knowing it, did our parents put inside of us? And their parents, and their parents. So do you actually want to accept the responsibility to feel all the pain, suffering, fear, and terror imprinted inside of you in order for you to progress? Because, it's like, how can you become yourself until you actually remove all the things that's not you? You're not the terror. You're not the hatred and the rage. You're not all that suffering. You're not the jealousy and the envy. You're not all that power-based hatred. All of that was imprinted. So are you willing to actually accept the responsibility to discover and feel it and responsibly learn how to be able to remove it? That's not an easy thing to do.
How am I going to market this for you, Denny?
I'm trying my best these days. I'm pedaling my bicycle as fast as I can, and I don't seem to be going anywhere. I'm on one of those exercise bicycles, and I'm just spinning, and I go, oh, I wonder if I'm actually getting anywhere.
Yeah.
That's how I'm doing, but this is how I observe almost everything. Every event has a correspondence to this ladder. Every feeling, every reaction, every bomb that drops somewhere else in the world, every mayhem, crisis, governmental, social phenomena, no matter what it is, it fits somewhere in my little map of topography. But at the very, very, very bottom of this is number 1. My humility to feel myself, all of it. My humility, empowered by the experience of accepting the responsibility that I actually want to progress, which means responsibly remove anything that's blocking my progression, and responsibly accept how all of that damage inside of me I've transmitted to number 3, 4, 5, and 6 all my life. Oh, that's not so nice, is it? That somehow, without knowing it, being imprinted by my great-grandfather, his rage and anger coming down through my grandmother, and then my father, and then me, it's been going on for a very long time.
My feeling is that we are, progressing in that realm. You could beat and rape your wife with impunity a couple of generations ago, and where we seem to be getting somewhere as a collective. Am I in illusion?
Well, I can assure you that I am. I don't have the current capacity to know if you're an illusion or not, because that would mean I'd have to be able to clean off my own windshield to see where I am so I can see where you are, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. I know it looks like that we're actually becoming a nicer world, but we're also building bigger bombs. And just because we're becoming more sophisticated about our control doesn't necessarily mean that we're resolving the true source of the problems within us. The number of drugs keeps increasing. The number of methods, like gene splicing, CRISPR technology, epigenetic understanding of how to manipulate things in genes and stem cells and medicines, and look how good we're getting at manipulating all of it. Aren't we progressing really well? I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. So I'm still back at number one, and I've been in a self-flogging number one. You know what a negative experience of two girl is? Self-pity and shame. Guilt, right? Self-pity, shame, and it comes down into the one boy experience of worthlessness. Have you ever felt absolutely worthless? Pathetically no good, worthless, you'll never make it. Why were you ever born worthless?
Well,
probably not.
Maybe I've got some work to do.
Topic, but not the experience. I've been scuba diving in the sewage. Because all those topics exist down there at number one. So yes, we can talk about what are some of the deepest emotions at the level of the one that we need to feel. On one side, shame. On the other side, terror. Because it's terror that drives my will to survive. It's shame that drives the pathetic continuation of my pitiful existence. Am I entirely too graphic with some of that?
Come and swim in the sewage, everyone.
An overview of why we should study the birth order and why is it so significant. I don't know that it will be actually understood or comprehended by anyone, and it would certainly help a little bit if I did. And I'm just not there yet. Questions for me?
Sounds like we'll be doing this for quite a while, and yeah, I think it's valuable to have the the glimpses of that ladder.
The glimpses of the ladder, where all the symptoms are. Somebody gets an injury in their head, or they get a cancer in their throat. Where is it? What is it? That something happens at 40, something happens at 60. Where are the cycles and the seasons? How can we use the feedback of the law of attraction to help us understand where we are on the progression? That's why I like it.
Yeah. So, yeah, we will be learned. We all have some access to 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, even though we're still got so much to learn down it.
But even if we're oblivious to it, we're all cycling through it, no matter what our attitude is at 6, what our attitude is about a creator. There is a God, there is no God, it's nothing, it's all, it's a man, it's a woman, it's a theology, it's a religion, it's not. It's an Aussie God, or it's a Belgian God, or whoever, who knows, right? Even if we're an atheist, it's already an attitude.
It's a belief system.
It's a belief system. And we just love our belief systems because they're held together by the one girl rootedness, and it's not going to let go. The will to survive takes that belief system and says, it's mine, It's mine. I'm not going to let go of it. It's mine. It's mine. Until humility comes along and says, I think there's another possibility. So why don't we pause here and we'll figure out what we're going to do with this.
Okay.
Thanks.